At my wife's office branch opening party, her boss mocked me in front of everyone, not knowing I own the company. You know that feeling when your spouse says, "Oh, it's just a small office thing. You don't have to come." And every single alarm bell in your head starts ringing like you're in a 5-alarm fire drill. Yeah, that was my first red flag. And let me tell you, I've got a PhD in reading between the lines when it comes to my wife's tone. Tessa, my beautiful, ambitious, occasionally too honest for her own good wife, had been acting weird for about 3 weeks now. And not the fun kind of weird where she suddenly decides we should learn salsa dancing or adopt a rescue guinea pig. No, this was corporate weird. The kind that makes you wonder if she's been replaced by a motivational speaker who exclusively communicates in LinkedIn buzzwords. Suddenly, everything coming out of her mouth was brand image, branch performance, and my personal favorite, team culture, which is just corporate speak for we're all pretending to like each other while secretly competing for the same promotion. She'd come home from work looking exhausted but weirdly energized, like she'd just finished running a marathon through a motivational poster factory. Her laptop was always open, her phone was always buzzing, and whenever I asked what was going on, she'd wave me off with some vague explanation about quarterly reviews and strategic initiatives that made my eyes glaze over faster than a Krispy Kreme conveyor belt. So, when I casually overheard her on the phone, "Okay, fine." I was totally eavesdropping while pretending to look for my favorite coffee mug in the kitchen, mentioning that her boss Gregory was hosting this massive grand opening gala for the new downtown branch, complete with crystal chandeliers, a live band, and apparently enough champagne to baptize a yacht. My curiosity went from 0 to Nancy Drew real quick. The kicker, she specifically told her friend on the phone that spouses weren't really expected to attend because it was more of a professional networking thing. Translation: I don't want my husband there, and I'm not entirely sure why, which should probably concern both of us. Now, here's the thing about me and red flags. Most people see them and think, maybe I should proceed with caution and have a mature conversation about my feelings. Me. I see a red flag and immediately think, challenge accepted. Let's turn this into a social experiment because apparently I never learned that curiosity killed the cat. Or maybe I just figured I've got 8 lives left and I'm feeling lucky. So, I made an executive decision right there in my kitchen, still holding that stupid coffee mug I'd been looking for as an excuse to lurk near her phone conversation. I was going to crash this party like a YouTube prankster with a trust fund and nothing to lose. My assistant Liam, God bless him, he's like a millennial version of Alfred from Batman if Alfred wore skinny jeans and had opinions about oat milk, caught wind of my plan the next morning when I casually mentioned I'd need the evening free on Friday. Liam's one of those people who's so organized that he color codes his color coding system. So naturally, his first instinct was to reach for his tablet and start typing up a formal RSVP like we were attending a royal wedding instead of what was essentially my wife's office party on steroids. "Sir, I can send over your details to the event coordinator," he said, his fingers already hovering over the keyboard with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoys administrative tasks. "We should probably confirm dietary restrictions, parking arrangements, and whether you need A+1 registered in the system." I looked at him with what I hoped was a mixture of paternal wisdom and barely contained mischief. "No need, Liam," I said, watching his face do that thing where he tries to hide his concern but fails miserably because his eyebrows betray him every single time. "Let's make it a surprise." Nothing says romance like public confusion and the faint possibility of security escorting me out. I could see him calculating the probability of disaster in his head, running through scenarios like he was preparing for a TED talk on how my boss's terrible decisions became learning opportunities. But to his credit, he just sighed, closed his tablet, and muttered something about updating my liability insurance, which I chose to interpret as enthusiastic support. The thing is, I wasn't just doing this because I missed Tessa, although I absolutely did miss her. 3 weeks of her coming home late and being weirdly distant had left me eating dinner alone more times than I cared to admit. And there's only so many nights a man can have a deep conversation with his microwave before he starts questioning his life choices. No, I was doing this primarily because curiosity is, has always been, and will forever be my favorite form of chaos. Some people skydive. Some people buy sports cars they can't afford. And me, I show up uninvited to corporate events just to see what happens when you throw a wrench into a perfectly planned machine. It's like performance art, except the canvas is social anxiety, and the paint is my complete disregard for conventional boundaries. As I stood in my closet Friday evening, picking out what to wear to an event I technically wasn't invited to, I felt that familiar buzz of excitement mixed with the slight possibility that this could backfire spectacularly. I settled on a charcoal gray suit. Not too flashy, not too casual, the kind of outfit that says, I could either be a guest or someone who's about to serve you documents, and you won't know which until it's too late. Tessa had already left an hour earlier, claiming she needed to get there early to help with setup, which I found suspicious considering she'd never voluntarily arrived early to anything in her entire life, including our wedding. But I digress. I checked myself in the mirror one last time, adjusted my tie, and couldn't help but smile at my own reflection like a villain in a movie who's about to monologue about his master plan. Marcus, I said to myself, because talking to your reflection is totally normal and not at all a sign that you should reconsider your evening plans. You're either about to have the best night of your life or you're about to become a cautionary tale that Liam tells at parties. Either way, it's going to be interesting. I grabbed my keys, sent Liam a text that just said, "Wish me luck." To which he immediately responded with a gif of a dumpster fire and 3 concerned emojis, and headed out the door. The drive downtown gave me way too much time to think about what I was actually doing and whether this qualified as healthy relationship behavior or if I was crossing some line that would eventually require couples therapy and a lot of apologetic flowers. But here's the thing about gut feelings. Sometimes they're indigestion from that sketchy food truck you insisted was authentic, and sometimes they're your subconscious screaming that something's off and you need to pay attention. And my gut was currently performing an entire Broadway musical about how something was definitely absolutely 100% not right with this whole situation. As I pulled into the parking garage near the venue, watching all these dressed up people streaming toward the building like ants heading to a very expensive picnic, I felt that last little whisper of doubt try to talk me out of this. You could just turn around, it said. You could go home, order pizza, watch that documentary about weird crimes, and pretend you never had this idea. But I've never been good at listening to the reasonable voice in my head. Mostly because the unreasonable voice is so much more entertaining and has a better playlist. So I got out of the car, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the building with the confidence of someone who absolutely belonged there. Even though we both knew, me and that fancy building, that I absolutely definitely, spectacularly did not. The night air was crisp, the kind that makes you feel alive and slightly reckless. And as I approached the entrance where a bored-looking guy with a clipboard was checking names, I realized I hadn't actually planned how I was going to get past the velvet rope of corporate exclusivity. But sometimes, I've learned the best plans are no plans at all. Just pure momentum and the unwavering belief that if you walk like you own the place, people assume you do. So that's exactly what I did. I walked right up to that entrance like I'd personally funded the entire event, which in a twist of irony that would become apparent very soon, wasn't actually that far from the truth. The event was pure pretentious glitter. The kind of setup that screams, we have money and we need everyone to know it without actually saying it out loud because that would be tacky. And God forbid corporate America ever admits to being tacky while literally draping everything in gold fabric. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, catching the light and throwing it around the room in a way that probably cost more than most people's cars. The appetizers looked like they'd been designed by architects rather than chefs. Tiny, geometric, and way too beautiful to actually eat, which I'm pretty sure was the point. Because if people are too intimidated to touch the food, you save money on catering. And everywhere I looked, people were standing in those weird corporate clusters, holding champagne flutes like they were props in a stage play about success, laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny, but had been told by someone important enough that laughing was basically a career move. The moment I walked in, and I mean the exact microsecond my shoes hit that polished marble floor, I could feel the atmosphere drop 2 degrees, maybe 3 if we're being generous with the metaphor. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and suddenly realize everyone's dress code memo went to their inbox, but somehow skipped yours. Except in this case, it wasn't about the clothes. It was about my entire existence being an unexpected variable in their carefully calculated evening. Eyes swiveled toward me like I was a glitch in the Matrix. A pop-up ad that appeared in the middle of their premium ad-free experience. You'd think I had walked in wearing flip-flops, board shorts, and a free Wi-Fi t-shirt with mysterious stains, not a perfectly acceptable charcoal suit that probably cost more than half the outfits in this room. But hey, perception is everything when you're the uninvited guest at the corporate ball. I spotted Tessa across the room almost immediately because my wife has this way of standing that's uniquely hers. Shoulders back, chin up like she's perpetually ready to either accept an award or fight someone depending on the situation. She was talking to a group of colleagues. Her laugh a little too loud, a little too performed, and I felt that pang of something I couldn't quite name. Was it jealousy? Concern? Indigestion from the sketchy gas station coffee I'd grabbed on the way? The jury was still out, but before I could make my way over to her, I got intercepted by the man himself. The legend, the myth, the reason I was crashing this party in the first place. Tessa's boss, Gregory, spotted me from across the room with the kind of radar that only middle management develops. After years of monitoring employee bathroom breaks and tracking who leaves at exactly 5 o'clock, He made his way toward me with that power walk that guys like imperfect in front of mirrors. Probably while listening to motivational podcasts about alpha males and disrupting industries. His smile was what I can only describe as aggressively friendly, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes because the eyes are too busy calculating whether you're useful or irrelevant. "Oh, you must be Tessa's husband," he said, extending a hand that gripped mine with just a little too much pressure, like he was trying to assert dominance through handshake sigh alone. I smiled back, matching his energy with the kind of pleasant neutrality that drives aggressive personalities absolutely insane. "That's me," I said. "Guilty as charged, Your Honor." He laughed at that like I'd said something clever, which I hadn't. But I'd learned a long time ago that powerful people are so used to others laughing at their jokes that they assume everyone else's comments are equally hilarious. "You're the handyman, right?" he asked. And there it was. That casual condescension wrapped in a question mark. The verbal equivalent of patting someone on the head while standing on a stepladder. Now, I could have corrected him right there. Could have dropped the bomb that would have made his smile crack like cheap china. But where's the fun in revealing your hand before you've even seen the flop? So instead, I went with misdirection, my favorite magic trick. "Only on weekends," I replied, keeping my tone light and breezy like we were discussing the weather instead of him casually insulting my career. During weekdays, I build other people's futures. I watched his face do that thing where the brain tries to process whether what I just said was profound or pretentious, ultimately landing on probably both. But I'll laugh anyway because I'm the boss and that's what I do. He laughed. Really laughed like I delivered the punchline to a joke he didn't quite get but didn't want to admit it. The people around him, his little entourage of corporate yesmen and yes women with their plastered-on smiles and nervous energy chuckled too, probably out of that primal fear of unemployment that makes office workers laugh at things that aren't funny and agree with opinions they don't share. It was like watching a nature documentary where the smaller animals mimic the alpha's behavior to avoid being eaten, except instead of the Serengeti, we were in a rented event space that smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. Gregory clapped me on the shoulder with that fake camaraderie that managers think creates team bonding, but actually just creates resentment and memes on private Slack channels. "Well, good for you, buddy," he said. And I hate being called buddy by people who aren't my buddies, but I let it slide because I was playing the long game here. It's great that Tessa has such a supportive partner who understands her career comes first. The way he said it made supportive partner sound like a participation trophy, like I was some stay-at-home puppy waiting for her to come home and feed me treats for being a good boy. I took a sip of champagne from a passing tray, mostly to give myself something to do with my hands besides making fists, and surveyed the room with fresh eyes. This wasn't just a party. It was a theatrical production, and Gregory was the self-appointed director, moving from group to group like a politician, working a rally, touching shoulders, laughing too loud, making sure everyone knew he was the center of this particular universe. And as I watched him work the room, wrapping his arm around employees with that proprietary confidence, something clicked into place in my brain. This wasn't about celebrating the new branch. This was about celebrating Gregory. And everyone here was just an extra in his personal vanity project. Gregory had that voice that could make even small talk sound like an insult. You know what I mean? It was this particular combination of tone and cadence that somehow managed to be simultaneously patronizing and self-congratulatory. Like every sentence that came out of his mouth was narrated by someone who thought they were the protagonist in a business school case study. The kind of voice that makes you want to check your pockets to make sure he didn't steal your wallet while complimenting your shoes. I've met guys like Gregory before. Hell, I've employed guys like Gregory before. Back when I thought confidence and competence were the same thing, which was a mistake that cost me about 6 months of profits and a whole lot of Advil. As the evening progressed and the champagne flowed like someone had broken a dam made entirely of expensive French grapes, Gregory really hit his stride, working the room like a game show host who'd forgotten this wasn't actually his show. He started this impromptu speech about his company's expansion, using possessive pronouns with the kind of frequency that would make an English teacher weep, conveniently forgetting, or more likely genuinely not knowing that his entire operational budget, his fancy new branch, and probably the designer water bottles in the break room all came from a board of directors he'd never actually met face to face. Well, technically he'd met one of them, except he didn't know it yet because that particular board member was currently standing 3 feet away from him, sipping mediocre champagne and contemplating whether corporate sabotage via truth-telling counted as a misdemeanor or just good entertainment. This expansion, Gregory announced to a captive audience of employees who literally couldn't leave without it being noted on their performance reviews, represents everything we've built together as a team. I nearly choked on my drink at that one because we was doing some seriously heavy lifting in that sentence. Like Atlas holding up the world, except Atlas was taking full credit for the planet's existence. The man had this gift for making collective achievements sound like personal victories. The corporate equivalent of a guy who shows up to a group project presentation, contributes one slide, and then tells everyone at the party that he basically did the whole thing. But the real kicker came when he spotted Tessa in the crowd and his face lit up like a dad seeing his kid at a school play, except creepier and with more HR violations waiting to happen. He navigated through the crowd with that purposeful stride that important people use when they want everyone to watch them walk. And before I could process what was happening, he'd wrapped an arm around my wife's shoulder with a casualness that made my eye twitch involuntarily. "She's our brightest employee," he proclaimed loudly enough that half the room turned to look, including a woman who I'm pretty sure was the actual brightest employee based on the way she rolled her eyes so hard I could hear it from across the room. "You should be proud she married up." Now, let me tell you something about that phrase, married up. It's one of those supposedly complimentary things that's actually just an insult wearing a party hat and pretending to be festive. It implies a hierarchy, a ladder, a ranking system where one person is objectively better than the other. And in this case, Gregory was heavily suggesting that my wife had climbed the social ladder by marrying someone who worked in her company under his management, which would theoretically make him the peak of this metaphorical mountain. The logic was so backwards, it could have been a pretzel. But here we were living in Gregory's reality where he was the sun and everyone else was just grateful to be planets in his solar system. I sipped my champagne slowly, buying myself exactly 3 seconds to decide whether I was going to let this slide or whether I was going to start lighting matches in this powder keg of a conversation. Spoiler alert, I've never been good at letting things slide. Mostly because my mouth has this annoying habit of operating independently from my brain's better judgment. "Oh, I'm extremely proud," I said, my voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that warns of incoming sarcasm like dark clouds before a thunderstorm. Some people climb ladders, others just stand at the top and watch. The air around us got thick enough to cut with a knife. That special kind of tension that happens when someone says something that could be interpreted as either profound wisdom or a direct insult, depending on how much you're willing to think about it. Gregory's face went through this fascinating journey of expressions. First, confusion like he was trying to translate my words from English to English, then a flicker of suspicion that maybe I'd just insulted him, but he couldn't quite figure out how. And finally landing on that fake laugh that people use when they're not sure if they should be offended, but don't want to seem like they don't get it. He blinked at me once, twice, 3 times, and I swear I could practically hear the Windows error sound effect playing in his head. That little do-do-do noise that computers make when they've encountered a problem they can't solve. You could see his brain trying to reboot, searching through his internal database of power moves and conversational dominance tactics coming up empty because nothing in his middle management training had prepared him for someone who wasn't intimidated by his title, his voice, or his aggressive handshake technique. Tessa, God bless her, was doing this thing where she was smiling, but also looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole, which I recognize as her, "My husband is causing a scene," and I don't know whether to be embarrassed or impressed expression. I'd seen it before at dinner parties, family reunions, and that one time at the grocery store when I got into a philosophical debate with the cashier about the existential implications of self-checkout machines. Her hand tightened around her champagne glass like she was considering whether the stem was strong enough to use as a weapon if this conversation went further south than it already had. The little crowd that had gathered around us for Gregory's impromptu Tessa appreciation moment was now doing that thing where they pretend they're not listening while obviously hanging on every word. Their eyes darting between Gregory and me like spectators at a tennis match played entirely with passive-aggressive commentary. I could see them mentally taking notes, preparing the group chat messages they'd send the moment they got to the bathroom, screenshots and all. The buffet looked like it had been catered by an accountant with anxiety, which is to say everything was perfectly arranged, color-coordinated, and probably cost 3 times what it should have because someone convinced Gregory that imported cheeses and organic kale garnishes were essential for brand positioning. There were little cards with calligraphy explaining each dish like we were at a museum exhibit instead of a corporate party because apparently shrimp cocktail needed a backstory involving sustainable fishing practices and artisanal cocktail sauce. I'm all for knowing where my food comes from, but when the description is longer than a CVS receipt, someone's trying too hard. I positioned myself strategically near the shrimp bowl. Partly because I was actually hungry after skipping dinner in my excitement to crash this party, and partly because the buffet table offered an excellent vantage point for people watching without looking like a creep. It's amazing what you can learn about office dynamics by watching who eats with whom, who's avoiding the carbs, and who's on their 4th trip to the dessert station while pretending it's their first. The shrimp were pretty good. I'll give them that. Definitely not the frozen garbage you get at budget conferences where the ice sculpture costs more than the actual food. While I was contemplating whether it would be socially acceptable to just camp out next to the cocktail sauce for the rest of the evening, I became acutely aware that I'd become the subject of several whispered conversations happening at various points around the room. You know that feeling when you can't hear exactly what people are saying, but you can feel the weight of their judgment like humidity before a rainstorm. Yeah, that employees were giving me these side eyes that they thought were subtle but were about as discreet as a foghorn at a library, leaning into each other's personal space and murmuring things behind their champagne flutes like they were in a spy movie, except everyone could totally see them. I caught fragments of conversations as people passed by the buffet table, pretending to deliberate over cheese selections while actually trying to get a closer look at me. That's her husband. One woman in a navy pantsuit whispered to her colleague, her tone suggesting she'd expected someone either significantly more impressive or significantly less. I couldn't quite tell which. He looks normal, another guy added. And I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult, but given the context, I was leaning toward insult. In their defense, I probably didn't fit whatever mental image they constructed based on Tessa's mysterious "I don't talk about my personal life at work" policy, which apparently had created a void that office gossip had filled with pure speculation and possibly a fantasy version of me that looked like a Hollywood handyman with abs and a tool belt. Gregory, because the universe has a sense of humor, and that sense of humor is mostly ironic, decided this was the perfect moment to make another appearance in my evening. He strutted by with the confidence of a peacock who just discovered mirrors, trailing a small entourage of what I assumed were either senior managers or people who'd lost a bet and had to follow him around all night. He stopped when he saw me. His face doing that thing where he was clearly trying to remember if he'd already talked to me or if all unimportant people just blurred together in his mind like background characters in a video game. "So, what do you do for a living?" He snapped his fingers like that would somehow summon my name from the void, which was particularly rich considering he'd already asked me this exact question earlier. But I guess when you're Gregory, people are only memorable if they're useful or if they have the authority to fire you. And he thought I was neither. "Marcus," I supplied helpfully, popping another shrimp into my mouth because if I was going to be interrogated about my career choices, I was at least going to do it while eating free food. "And I dabble in real estate. You could say I have a few properties under management." I kept my tone casual, like I was discussing a hobby rather than a business portfolio, because the best way to deliver information that's going to explode later is to make it sound as boring as possible in the moment. "Oh, like rentals?" he asked. And there it was again. That voice that could make even genuine questions sound condescending, like he was talking to a child who just announced they wanted to be an astronaut when they grew up. He said, "Rentals," the way someone might say adorable while patting a puppy with that tone that suggested he was humoring me by even engaging in this conversation. His entourage nodded along like those bobblehead dolls people put on their dashboards, agreeing with implications that hadn't even been fully stated yet. "More like entire buildings," I replied casually, reaching for a napkin. Because shrimp cocktail is delicious but messy, and I've learned that it's hard to maintain dignity while having cocktail sauce on your chin. I said it with the same energy someone might use to correct a minor detail. Like, actually, it's pronounced GIF, not GIF. Giving no indication that I'd just dropped information that should have made his brain perform emergency calculations about exactly who he'd been talking to for the past hour. He laughed again, and at this point, I was starting to think maybe Gregory just laughed at everything as a defense mechanism, like a nervous tic, except wrapped in false confidence and expensive cologne. "Well, good for you. Must be nice to have a wife who brings home the big bucks." He said it loud enough that several people nearby turned to look, and I saw Tessa across the room physically was, her shoulders tensing up like she'd just heard nails on a chalkboard. The implication was clear. In Gregory's worldview, I was a kept man, living off my wife's salary, probably spending my days watching daytime television and occasionally pretending to be productive with my rental properties that he clearly imagined were like two duplexes in a questionable neighborhood. "Yeah," I said, my smile getting wider because I could feel the punchline building in my chest like a sneeze. "You can't hold back. She really owns this place." I let the words hang in the air. Perfectly ambiguous. Technically true in multiple ways that Gregory's brain was definitely not processing because he was too busy enjoying what he thought was agreement with his assessment of our marriage dynamic. Tessa coughed into her wine glass across the room, a sound that I recognized as her, "Oh God, what is he doing now?" cough, the one that usually preceded her dragging me away from family dinners or party conversations before I could cause irreparable damage to our social standing. If irony were a currency, I'd have retired again, bought a private island, and named it Told You So. Halfway through the night, when the champagne had sufficiently loosened everyone's professional facades and the room had reached that perfect level of corporate buzz where bad decisions start sounding like team-building opportunities, Gregory decided it was time for a toast. Because of course he did. You can't have a party celebrating Gregory without Gregory making a speech about Gregory thinly disguised as appreciation for everyone else. It's like a law of physics or something. For every action of corporate success, there's an equal and opposite reaction of a middle manager taking credit for it. He tapped a spoon against his champagne glass with the kind of theatrical flair that suggested he'd been practicing this moment in his bathroom mirror, probably while wearing a bathrobe and imagining himself as some kind of business mogul in a movie montage. The crystal made this perfect little ringing sound that cut through the conversations like a knife through butter, and everyone obediently stopped talking and turned toward him like well-trained seals waiting for someone to throw them a fish. The room fell into that expectant silence that happens when the boss wants attention. The kind of silence that's less about genuine interest and more about self-preservation instincts kicking in. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory boomed. His voice taking on that motivational speaker quality that makes you want to either applaud or cringe, possibly both simultaneously. He raised his glass high, champagne slushing dangerously close to the rim because he was more focused on looking important than on basic liquid physics. "Let's toast to success. And to the supportive partners who stay home and watch us shine." He delivered that last line with a wink and a gesture in my general direction, like he was doing me a favor by acknowledging my existence, like I should be grateful he'd included the stay-at-home spouses in his moment of corporate glory. The room erupted in laughter. That specific kind of obligatory office laughter that sounds less like genuine amusement and more like a survival mechanism. The auditory equivalent of showing your belly to a predator so they don't eat you. People raised their glasses dutifully, their smiles plastered on their faces with the same authenticity as a politician's campaign photo. I watched as several employees glanced in my direction with expressions ranging from pity to second-hand embarrassment like they were watching someone get roasted at a comedy show. Except nobody had signed up to be the volunteer. My wife smiled nervously. Her face doing that thing where she was trying to look like she thought it was funny while also internally screaming, which I learned to recognize after 8 years of marriage and countless family dinners where my jokes landed somewhere between inappropriate and were never invited back here again. Her eyes met mine across the room with an apologetic intensity that could have melted steel, and I could practically read her thoughts. "Please don't make a scene. Please don't make a scene. Oh God, he's definitely going to make a scene." But here's the thing about me in moments like these. I've never been particularly good at letting condescending nonsense slide by without at least lobbing a verbal grenade in return. Call it a character flaw, call it pride, call it whatever you want. But when someone takes a shot at you disguised as a compliment, you've got two choices. Swallow it and smile, or return fire with interest. And I've always been more of a return fire kind of guy. Mostly because swallowing your pride gives you indigestion and therapy bills. I raised my own glass slowly, deliberately, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing something everyone else doesn't, which is basically my favorite position to be in at any social gathering. The movement caught Gregory's attention, and I saw his face light up with what he probably thought was camaraderie, like we were buddies now, bonding over his hilarious observation about traditional gender roles and spousal dynamics. "Oh, Gregory, buddy, you sweet summer child. You have no idea what's coming. Cheers to bosses who think success is a solo act." I announced, my voice carrying across the room with crystal clarity because unlike Gregory, I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to say something interesting enough that people actually wanted to listen. I paused for exactly one beat, letting the words sink in just enough that people started doing mental math about whether I'd just said what they thought I'd said. "I'd toast your leadership, but I'm afraid the HR policy forbids fiction." The room went from polite laughter to absolutely deafening silence in about half a second, which is faster than most people can process a surprise plot twist in a movie. You could have heard a pin drop, except instead of a pin, it was more like everyone's jaw simultaneously hitting the floor. Then slowly, like a wave building before it crashes on the shore, genuine laughter started rippling through the crowd. Not that fake corporate laughter from before, but real actual amusement from people who'd probably been waiting months or even years for someone to call out Gregory's particular brand of self-congratulatory leadership. The intern near the back, a kid who couldn't have been more than 23 and still had that fresh out of college optimism that corporate life hadn't completely crushed yet, actually snorted into his drink, then looked absolutely terrified that he'd made an audible sound, his eyes going wide like a deer that just realized it's standing in the middle of a highway. A woman from accounting that I vaguely recognized from Tessa's company holiday card photos, pressed her lips together so hard, trying not to laugh that her face turned red, her shoulders shaking with suppressed amusement. Even some of the senior managers, the ones who probably had to deal with Gregory's ego on a daily basis, couldn't quite hide their smirks behind their champagne glasses. The laughter this time wasn't polite. It was real. It was cathartic. And it was definitely at Gregory's expense rather than mine. It was the kind of laughter that happens when someone finally says out loud what everyone's been thinking in private Slack channels and bathroom conversations for months. You could feel the energy in the room shift like someone had just flipped a switch and suddenly this wasn't Gregory's party anymore. It was just a party and the Emperor's clothes were looking pretty transparent under the crystal chandelier lighting. Gregory's face went through a fascinating evolution of expressions in the span of about 5 seconds. First came confusion because his brain was still processing whether what I'd said was a compliment wrapped in weird phrasing or an actual insult. Then came the dawning realization as he replayed my words in his head and his face started to flush. That particular shade of red that happens when someone's blood pressure spikes and their ego takes a direct hit simultaneously. His smile, that perfectly practiced CEO smile that probably cost him hours of mirror time, twitched at the corners like it was trying to decide whether to stay put or abandon ship entirely. The man hated being out funny. You could see it written all over his face like subtitles in a foreign film. In his world, he was the one who made the jokes. He was the one who got the laughs. He was the center of attention. And everyone else was just the supporting cast. Having someone, especially someone he'd categorized as unimportant as just the supportive spouse who stayed home, flip the script on him in front of his entire staff was probably the social equivalent of getting pantsed at prom. His entourage, those loyal followers who'd been nodding along to everything he said all night, suddenly found the floor very interesting, studying their shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. As dessert rolled in, tiny, pretentious things that looked like they'd been assembled by surgeons rather than pastry chefs. Each one a work of art that probably cost $15 and would disappear in one bite. Gregory was clearly regrouping, gathering his wounded pride like a general rallying troops after an unexpected ambush. I could see it in the way he straightened his shoulders, adjusted his tie, and scanned the room with renewed determination. He wasn't going to let some nobody's spouse get the last laugh at his party, at his event, in his moment of glory. Oh no, Gregory was about to make a comeback, and I could smell it coming like rain before a storm. He made his way back over to where I was standing, having migrated from the shrimp station to the dessert table, because if you're going to watch a man dig his own grave, you might as well do it while eating a chocolate mousse that costs more than most people's lunch budgets. His entourage had thinned out a bit. Apparently, public humiliation isn't great for maintaining your follower count, but he still had a couple of loyal supporters flanking him, like Secret Service agents protecting someone who definitely didn't deserve protection. Gregory leaned in with that smirk again, the one that had probably worked on intimidating junior employees and interns, but was about to be as effective as a water gun at a house fire. You could tell he thought he was being clever, that he'd found the perfect angle to reassert his dominance in this increasingly weird social chess match we were playing. So, Marcus, he said, my name dripping with condescension like honey from a particularly aggressive bear. How does it feel being married to the real breadwinner? Now, there are moments in life where you can choose to be the bigger person, to take the high road, to smile and nod and let ignorance slide by without comment. This was not going to be one of those moments. I'd already committed to this path the second I walked through those doors uninvited. And there's no point in half-assing chaos once you've decided to embrace it fully. Plus, that chocolate mousse had given me the sugar rush I needed to really commit to what was about to happen. I grinned at him. The kind of smile that probably should have served as a warning label, like those signs at amusement parks that say, you must be this tall to ride. Except mine would say, you must be this prepared for your world to flip upside down. Delicious, actually, I said, taking another spoonful of mousse for dramatic effect, especially since the bread comes from my bakery. I let that hang in the air for exactly 2 seconds, watching his face scrunch up in confusion like he was trying to solve a math problem that didn't have enough numbers. Sorry, what? Gregory said, his smirk faltering like a car engine that just realized it was out of gas. Around us, conversations had started to die down again because apparently I'd become the evening's entertainment, which was fine by me since I'd paid for the venue anyway, though Gregory didn't know that yet. The word yet was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. I turned toward the chief financial officer, Clara, who had been sitting quietly at a nearby table for most of the evening, nursing the same glass of wine and watching the proceedings with the tired expression of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Clara was one of those sharp, no-nonsense women in her 50s who'd probably forgotten more about running a business than Gregory would ever learn. And I'd always appreciated her direct communication style and her ability to make grown men cry during budget meetings. Clara, I called out, my voice friendly but loud enough that everyone within a 20-foot radius could hear, which at this point was basically everyone because the entire party had somehow migrated toward our little drama like moths to a particularly entertaining flame. Could you pass me the check file? The one you and I signed when we approved the new branch budget. Her fork, which had been halfway to her mouth with what looked like a very expensive piece of cheesecake, froze in midair. Her eyes widened just slightly, and I watched her brain process what I just asked, what I just implied, and what was about to happen in the next 60 seconds. To her credit, she didn't miss a beat. Clara hadn't gotten to CFO by being slow on the uptake or bad at reading rooms. "Sir," she said, and that single word, "sir," dropped into the conversation like a nuclear bomb with a polite accent. "You mean the file?" The temperature in the room dropped about 15 degrees. Suddenly, everyone's champagne tasted a little different. The crystal light seemed a little brighter, and the background music that had been playing all night became very conspicuous in its suddenly noticeable presence. People shifted in their seats, sat down their drinks, turned toward our little tableau like we were the main act in a play they'd accidentally bought tickets for. Gregory looked confused, which was fair because his entire understanding of the corporate hierarchy was currently being challenged in real time. He glanced between me and Clara like he was watching a tennis match, except instead of a ball being volleyed back and forth, it was his career and reputation. "What file?" he asked, his voice not quite as confident as it had been 30 seconds ago. "What are you talking about?" I could see the wheels turning in his head, smoke practically coming out of his ears as he tried to piece together what was happening. The problem with guys like Gregory is that they're so convinced they're at the top of the food chain that they never bother to look up and check if there's something bigger swimming above them. They see the title on their door, the respect from their direct reports, and assume that's the whole picture, never considering that maybe they're middle management in someone else's empire. Several other senior staff members had gone very still, the kind of still that happens when animals sense a predator nearby. The VP of operations, whose name I remembered was something like Gerald or maybe Jerome. Honestly, I tried not to memorize everyone's names because that felt like overkill, had gone pale. His dessert fork clattering onto his plate with a sound that echoed in the increasingly quiet room. The head of HR, a woman named Patricia, who I'd met exactly twice in board meetings and who ran her department with the efficiency of a Swiss watch and the mercy of a medieval executioner, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes darting between Gregory and me like she was already mentally drafting the paperwork that was going to follow this conversation. "I think," Laura said slowly, setting down her fork with deliberate care and reaching for her phone, which I knew contained all the relevant files, because Clara was nothing if not prepared for every possible scenario, including apparently the surprise appearance of the company's majority shareholder at a branch opening where said shareholder proceeds to destroy the CEO's ego in front of the entire staff. "That Mr. Hale is referring to the Q3 expansion budget that was approved by the board last quarter." "Mr. Hale," Gregory repeated, his voice cracking slightly on my last name like it was a foreign word he'd never encountered before. His face was doing this fascinating thing where confusion was slowly morphing into dawning horror, like watching someone realize they'd been swimming in the shallow end of the pool while thinking they were in the ocean. "Wait, Hale? Like Hale Industries? Like the company you work for?" "Yes," I finished for him because watching people connect dots in real time is one of my favorite spectator sports. Right up there with watching someone try to assemble IKEA furniture without reading the instructions. I stood up slowly, taking my time because moments like these deserve to be savored like a fine wine or a really good revenge plot in a movie where the hero finally reveals they were 10 steps ahead the whole time. I adjusted my jacket with the kind of casual precision that suggested this wasn't a big deal to me, which it wasn't, but was clearly becoming the biggest deal of Gregory's entire professional life based on the way all the color had drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug at the bottom of his feet. The room had gone so quiet you could hear the ice melting in people's drinks, the soft buzz of the crystal chandeliers overhead, and what I'm pretty sure was Gregory's heart rate accelerating to dangerous levels. I smiled, and not the fake corporate smile that everyone had been wearing like masks all evening, but a genuine smile, the kind that comes from deep satisfaction and the knowledge that you're about to drop a truth bomb so massive it'll register on the Richter scale. "I'm Marcus Hale," I said, letting each word land with the weight of a judge's gavel in a courtroom drama. "Majority shareholder and founder of this company. You've been working for me, Greg." I dropped the Ori from his name deliberately because nothing says I own you quite like unauthorized nickname privileges, and also because I knew it would irritate him, which at this point was just the cherry on top of an already delicious sundae of schadenfreude. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. Gasps rippled through the hall like a wave at a baseball game. Except instead of coordinated fun, it was pure shock and disbelief spreading from person to person as the implications of what I'd just said registered in their champagne-soaked brains. Someone dropped a glass. I heard it shatter somewhere near the back of the room. And honestly, that was perfect timing. Really added to the dramatic atmosphere. The DJ, bless his heart, had been playing some generic smooth jazz background music all night. And in this moment of cosmic comedy, the track ended right as I finished speaking, leaving us in complete silence, except for the sound of Gregory's world crumbling around him like a sand castle at high tide. People's phones started coming out, not even subtly, just blatantly held up like they were at a concert, and I was the headlining act. I saw at least 5 people open their LinkedIn apps, probably to confirm what I just said, searching Marcus Hale and Hale Industries and watching their entire understanding of the evening's power dynamics get rewritten in real time. The intern who snorted earlier looked like he might pass out from the sheer drama of it all. His eyes wide enough to see the whites all the way around, his mouth hanging open in that perfect O shape that you usually only see in cartoons. Gregory stuttered. Actually stuttered. And I'd never seen him at a loss for words before because the man normally had verbal diarrhea. Just couldn't shut up if his life depended on it. But right now, he was struggling to form complete sentences like he'd forgotten how language worked. You're joking. He finally managed, his voice cracking like a teenager going through puberty. His face had gone from red to white to a kind of grayish green that suggested his expensive dinner might be making a return appearance soon. This is some kind of you can't be. Wouldn't that be convenient? I replied, my tone conversational like we were discussing the weather instead of his complete professional annihilation. I took a step closer to him, not threatening, just closing the distance enough that he couldn't mistake my next words for anything other than what they were. A statement of fact delivered with the full weight of ownership behind it. You've been mocking your staff, misusing funds, and flirting with my wife. Not the best performance review, huh? That last part about flirting with Tessa was maybe a slight exaggeration. Gregory had been condescending and possessive, but not overtly flirty, but I figured if we were already burning bridges, we might as well throw some extra gasoline on the fire for good measure. Plus, I'd seen the way he touched her shoulder earlier. That casual ownership that bosses sometimes claim over their employees like they're property instead of people. And that had pissed me off more than all the condescending comments about my supposed career as a kept husband combined. He turned even paler, if that was possible, like someone had applied a second coat of white paint over the first. Sir, he started, and hearing him call me sir, after an evening of buddy and barely disguised contempt was its own special kind of satisfaction. It was like watching a bully realize the kid they've been picking on is actually the principal's son. Except in this case, I wasn't the principal's son. I was the guy who owned the whole damn school. Don't worry, I said, cutting him off before he could launch into whatever graveling explanation or desperate excuse he was formulating in his panic-stricken brain. I won't fire you here. HR hates paperwork during parties. I glanced over at Patricia, the head of HR, who despite the chaos, was taking notes on her phone with the dedication of a court stenographer, probably already drafting the separation agreement in her head. But by Monday, I expect a resignation letter so polished it blinds me. Single-spaced, proper formatting, maybe throw in some of that corporate buzzword salad you're so fond of, really make it sing. The room was still frozen. Everyone processing this shift in reality like their brains needed to reboot. Clara was hiding a smile behind her wine glass. And I caught her eye and gave her a small nod of acknowledgement because she'd played her part perfectly. And also because I knew she'd been dealing with Gregory's nonsense for months and was probably enjoying this moment as much as I was. The VP of Operations, I decided his name was definitely Gerald. Looked like he was running calculations in his head, probably trying to figure out if he'd ever been dismissive to me at any board meetings and whether his own job was in jeopardy. Tessa across the room had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wider than I'd ever seen them, and I couldn't quite read her expression. Was it horror, shock, admiration? Probably some combination of all three, plus a healthy dose of I can't believe you just did that. And we're going to have a very long conversation about this when we get home. But underneath it all, I saw something else. A flicker of satisfaction, maybe even pride, because as much as she might scold me later for the dramatic reveal, I knew she'd been dealing with Gregory's condescension, too. And watching him get taken down several dozen pegs had to feel at least a little bit good. Gregory's entourage had completely abandoned him at this point, backing away like he was radioactive, which in career terms he absolutely was. Nobody wants to be associated with the guy who just got publicly destroyed by the owner of the company, especially when said destruction was entirely his own fault for being an arrogant jerk who couldn't resist mocking the wrong person. It was like watching rats desert a sinking ship, except the rats were middle managers in expensive suits and the ship was Gregory's career and reputation going down in flames. I think Clara said into the silence, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been CFO long enough to see everything and be surprised by nothing. That concludes this evening's entertainment. Perhaps we should all head home and reconvene during normal business hours. It was a diplomatic way of saying, show's over, folks. Nothing more to see here. And also a graceful exit strategy for everyone who didn't want to be standing in the blast radius when this situation got even more awkward, which it inevitably would if everyone kept standing around staring. People started moving slowly at first, then faster as they realized this was their chance to escape and immediately start texting everyone they knew about what they just witnessed. I walked out to slow claps. Literally actual slow claps, and not the sarcastic kind that usually accompanies someone's spectacular failure, but the genuine appreciative kind that you hear in movies when the underdog finally stands up to the bully. Except in this case, I wasn't really the underdog. I was more like the secret final boss who'd been disguised as a regular NPC the whole time. The interns started it, which was fitting because interns are usually the only people in corporate America who still have enough soul left to appreciate good drama when they see it. One brave kid near the dessert table just started clapping slowly, deliberately, and then his friend joined in, and then suddenly it spread like wildfire through the younger employees who'd probably been on the receiving end of Gregory's condescension more times than they could count. The senior staff looked conflicted, caught between wanting to join in and worrying about whether applauding the public humiliation of their now former CEO was a career-lifting move, which honestly, fair enough. Corporate survival instincts are strong, and nobody wants to be the person who backed the wrong horse, even when the wrong horse was clearly a jackass who'd been riding everyone else's coattails to success. But a few of them, the ones who'd probably been around long enough to not care anymore, or who'd reached that perfect level of seniority where they could get away with anything short of embezzlement, gave me subtle nods of approval, the corporate equivalent of a standing ovation. I made my way through the crowd, which parted for me like I was Moses and they were the Red Sea. Except instead of fleeing from Pharaoh's army, they were fleeing from the awkwardness of making eye contact with me after spending the entire evening treating me like the help. It was beautiful in its own weird way, watching people suddenly remember that they'd maybe been less than welcoming to the guy who signed their paychecks. Their faces doing mental gymnastics, trying to recall if they'd said anything insulting within my earshot. Spoiler alert, several of them definitely had, but I wasn't keeping score. Okay, fine. I was totally keeping score, but I wasn't going to do anything about it because I'm petty, not vindictive. There's a difference, and it's a line I maintain with great care. The fresh night air hit my face as I walked through those glass doors. And let me tell you, it felt better than the champagne, better than the chocolate mousse, better than any of the overpriced everything that had filled that venue. It was the air of freedom, of justice served, of a job well done, with just a hint of expensive cologne and urban downtown smells that reminded me why I usually avoided these kinds of events. The city was alive around me, completely unaware that inside that building, a small corporate drama had just played out like a Greek tragedy, except with better lighting and worse moral lessons. Behind me, I could hear the whispers buzzing like a hive of very gossipy bees. Fragments of conversations floating through the doors before they swung shut. "That's the owner," one voice said, high-pitched with disbelief. "Oh my God, Greg's finished." Another added, and I heard what sounded like genuine schadenfreude in that tone, which suggested Gregory hadn't exactly been winning any popularity contests among his staff. "Did you see his face?" Someone else chimed in, followed by laughter that was probably accompanied by frantic texting and screenshots being shared on whatever group chat these people used to survive their work days. I chuckled to myself, pulling out my phone to text Liam that I was ready for pickup because yes, I'd arranged for my driver to be on standby because I'm not an amateur and I knew this evening was either going to end with me making a dramatic exit or being escorted out by security. And either way, I didn't want to deal with parking. My driver, Victor, pulled up in the black sedan within 30 seconds. The man had timing that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous and opened the car door with the kind of professional discretion that comes from years of driving rich people to and from situations they probably shouldn't have gotten themselves into in the first place. "Good evening, sir," Victor said, his face perfectly neutral except for the tiny smirk playing at the corner of his mouth because Victor had been with me long enough to know when I'd been up to something. "Successful event?" He asked it casually, like he was inquiring about the weather, but I could hear the genuine curiosity underneath because I'd given him exactly zero details about why I needed a driver for my wife's office party. And Victor was smart enough to know that when I was being deliberately vague, entertainment was sure to follow. "Educational," I said, sliding into the leather seat that still smelled like new car even though the sedan was 3 years old. Because Victor maintained this vehicle better than most people maintain their relationships. "We learned our CEO is allergic to humility, accountability, and basic human decency. Also, that shrimp cocktail at corporate events is surprisingly decent." So, the evening wasn't a complete waste. Buckled my seat belt while Victor closed my door with that perfect soft click that expensive cars make. The kind that whispers, "You paid too much for this," in the most satisfying way possible. He smirked for real this time as he got into the driver's seat, adjusting the rear view mirror, even though it didn't need adjusting. Just giving himself something to do while he processed what I'd said. "I'll have HR draft a resignation gift basket," Victor offered. And this was why I liked him. The man understood that sometimes the best response to corporate drama was more corporate drama wrapped up in the absurd formality of office traditions like gift baskets that nobody actually wants but everyone feels obligated to give. Include tissues, I said, settling back into the seat and watching the city lights blur past as we pulled away from the curb. Make it thoughtful. Maybe throw in one of those motivational books about how to bounce back from career setbacks. Really lean into the irony. I was being facetious. Obviously, HR wasn't actually going to send Gregory a gift basket. That would be adding insult to injury in a way that crossed the line from justified payback into cruel and unusual punishment. And I tried to maintain at least some semblance of professional standards, even when publicly destroying someone's ego. Victor chuckled, a deep sound that rumbled from his chest, and I saw his shoulders shake with barely suppressed laughter. Shall I take the scenic route home, sir, or do you need to get back quickly before Mrs. Hale calls wondering where you disappeared to? It was a valid question because Tessa had definitely seen me leave, and she was probably currently having a mild panic attack while trying to decide whether to follow me out or stay and do damage control with her colleagues who just discovered her husband was basically their ultimate boss. Scenic route, I decided because I wasn't quite ready to face the music yet. And by music, I meant my wife's inevitable interrogation about why I decided tonight was the perfect night to reveal my identity instead of I don't know, mentioning it casually over breakfast sometime in the past 3 weeks when she'd been complaining about Gregory's management style. Give me at least 20 minutes to come up with a good explanation for why I crashed her office party and destroyed her boss's career in front of everyone she works with. Might I suggest leading with he deserved it? Victor offered helpfully, merging into traffic with the smooth confidence of someone who'd been navigating city streets for longer than some of these other drivers had been alive. I find that establishing moral high ground early in an argument significantly improves outcomes. Victor, buddy, you're a philosopher and a driver, I said, pulling out my phone to check my messages, which had already started coming in. Liam had sent approximately 7 texts, each one more excited than the last. Apparently, the internetwork had already spread word about what happened and it had reached social media faster than a celebrity scandal. Clara had sent a simple well played sir with a wine glass emoji which was high praise coming from her. And Tessa had sent a single text that just said we need to talk with a period at the end which in wife speak translated to you're not in trouble exactly but you're definitely going to have to explain yourself and it better be good. I typed back a quick on my way home, love you, and added a heart emoji because sometimes the best defense is a good offense or in this case a preemptive reminder that whatever I'd done it from a place of love and protecting her from a boss who clearly didn't respect her or her husband. Whether that excuse would actually work remained to be seen. But I had 20 minutes of scenic route to refine my argument and I'd talk my way out of worse situations. Probably, maybe. Okay, definitely not. But optimism is important in a marriage. Tessa came home later, much later than I'd expected, which gave me way too much time to sit on the couch rehearsing my defense like a lawyer preparing for the trial of the century. Except my opposing counsel was my wife, and she had access to all my weak points and emotional vulnerabilities. I'd changed out of my suit into sweatpants and a t-shirt, partly for comfort, and partly because it's harder to stay mad at someone in sweatpants. It's a scientific fact I just made up, but choose to believe anyway. I heard her keys in the door around 11:30. That distinctive jangle followed by the sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor with a rhythm that suggested she was either exhausted or furious, possibly both. When she walked into the living room, her makeup was smeared, mascara tracking down her cheeks in thin black lines that made her look like she'd either been crying or had gotten caught in unexpected rain. Except I knew it wasn't raining because I checked. Her hair, which had been perfectly styled in that professional updo thing she does for important events, was coming loose, strands falling around her face in a way that would have been romantic if the circumstances were different. And she wasn't looking at me like I just told her I'd sold her car to buy magic beans. Her voice came out small, tired, nothing like her usual confident tone that could silence a conference room. Why didn't you tell me you own the company? It wasn't an accusation exactly, more like genuine confusion mixed with hurt. And that hit harder than anger would have because I can handle anger. Anger is clean, straightforward, something you can argue against. But hurt is complicated, messy, the kind of thing that requires actual emotional intelligence and mature communication skills that I definitely had somewhere in my repertoire if I could just remember where I'd put them. I patted the couch cushion next to me. An invitation she ignored, choosing instead to stand there in the middle of our living room like she was testifying in court and sitting would somehow weaken her case. Because, sweetheart, I said, trying to find the words that would explain a decision that had made perfect sense to me 3 weeks ago, but now, faced with her smudged makeup and wounded expression seemed maybe less brilliant than I'd originally thought. Sometimes the best way to see a person's character is to step out of the spotlight and watch what they do when they think you're nobody. I meant Gregory obviously, but I could see from her face that she was also processing what this meant about her colleagues, about the way people had treated both of us all evening, about the whole social experiment I'd been conducting without her knowledge or consent. She started to cry, really cry. Not the angry tears that come with yelling matches, but the sad, frustrated ones that somehow feel worse because they're quieter, more genuine. She sank onto the arm of the couch, not quite sitting with me, but not standing anymore either. Her body language screaming exhaustion and emotional overload. "I was just embarrassed," she said, her voice catching on the words like they had sharp edges. "That whole night, I was embarrassed. Of you, of me, of us." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I didn't want people thinking I married you for money, that I slept my way to my position, that everything I've worked for was just because my husband owns the damn company." And there it was, the real issue underneath all of this, the thing I probably should have considered before deciding to play corporate Batman and reveal my secret identity at her office party. Tessa was proud, fiercely independent, the kind of person who'd rather die than have someone think she didn't earn her success through her own merit and hard work. She'd been building her career at this company for 3 years before we even met. Had worked her way up from junior analyst to senior manager through actual competence and dedication. And now everyone she worked with was going to wonder if her promotions had been legitimate or if they'd been gifts from her husband, who happened to own everything. "Fess," I said softly, reaching for her hand, which she let me take even though she was still crying, still processing, still angry in that complicated way that meant we were going to be okay eventually. But the road there was going to involve a lot of talking and probably some more crying. "You earned your position. You're brilliant at what you do and everyone knows it. Gregory was the one who didn't deserve his job, not you." It was true. I'd looked at her performance reviews, her project completions, her client satisfaction ratings, all without her knowing because I tried to keep my personal and professional lives separate right up until they collided spectacularly tonight. She shook her head, tears still falling, and I grabbed the tissue box from the side table, offering it to her like a white flag in our domestic negotiation. "That's not how it's going to look, Marcus. That's not what people are going to say. By Monday morning, the whole office is going to be whispering about how I've been sleeping with the owner's wife." "Wait, that doesn't make sense. Sleeping with the owner while pretending to just be a normal employee." She blew her nose, a honking sound that was somehow both miserable and adorable. "I'm going to be that person, the boss's wife. Everything I do from now on is going to be suspect." I nodded, acknowledging the validity of her concern because she wasn't wrong. Office politics were brutal and people loved a good conspiracy theory more than they loved actual facts. "Don't worry, Tess," I said. And I could feel the joke forming before my brain could stop my mouth, which has always been a problem I should probably work on. "They'll think you run HR by tomorrow morning after your boss's resignation hits LinkedIn." I said it trying to lighten the mood, to inject some levity into this heavy conversation, but I realized about halfway through the sentence that maybe this wasn't the right moment. Her glare could have melted steel, could have cut through titanium, could have vaporized whatever remained of my hope that humor was going to save me from this conversation. Her eyes, still watery from crying, narrowed into slits that promised retribution, possibly involving my favorite gaming console being donated to charity or my craft beer collection mysteriously disappearing. "What?" she said, her voice dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before storms and volcanic eruptions. "Too soon," I smiled sweetly. The kind of smile that acknowledged I'd just stepped in it, but was committed to the bit anyway, because backing down now would be admitting defeat. And I'd already committed so many crimes against good judgment tonight that one more couldn't hurt. "Maybe a little too soon," I admitted, squeezing her hand. But in my defense, the joke was right there. And you know, I can't resist low-hanging fruit. She pulled her hand away, but I caught the corner of her mouth twitching, fighting against the smile that wanted to break through her anger and hurt. By Monday morning, Gregory's resignation email hit every inbox like a fireworks show, except instead of oohs and oh. It was met with frantic forwarding, screenshot sharing, and the kind of office gossip that usually only happens when someone gets caught doing something truly scandalous in the supply closet. I wasn't even in the office. I work from home most days because what's the point of owning a company if you have to sit in traffic and pretend to enjoy fluorescent lighting? But Liam sent me updates every 15 minutes like he was providing play-by-play commentary for the Super Bowl of corporate drama. Email arrived at 8:47 a.m. His first text read, subject line, "A new chapter." He used the word synergy 3 times in the first paragraph. It's physically painful to read. Followed by "break room is packed. Someone brought donuts. This is better than the time Karen from accounting got caught catfishing the intern." And then update, people are printing it out. Printing it like it's a historical document. I saw someone laminating a copy. "Sir, they're laminating it." I sat at my home office desk, coffee in hand, reading through Gregory's resignation letter that Clara had forwarded to me for official review, which was corporate speak for, "You need to see this masterpiece of passive-aggressive professional suicide." The letter was exactly what I'd expected, a carefully worded piece of fiction that made it sound like Gregory was leaving to pursue other opportunities and focus on personal growth, with absolutely no mention of the fact that he'd spent an entire evening being condescending to the company owner while said owner was pretending to be a stay-at-home handyman. It was corporate poetry. Really, the way he managed to make getting fired sound like a voluntary journey of self-discovery. The board congratulated me through a flurry of emails that arrived throughout the morning. Each one more enthusiastic than the last. A graceful intervention, the chairman called it, which was a polite way of saying, "Thank God someone finally dealt with that problem." "Long overdue," added another board member who'd apparently been waiting for an excuse to get rid of Gregory for months, but hadn't wanted to deal with the paperwork. They scheduled an emergency meeting for Tuesday to discuss interim leadership, succession planning, and probably to hear the full story because I kept my little party-crashing adventure to myself. And they were definitely curious about how exactly their reclusive majority shareholder had ended up at a branch opening, let alone demolishing the CEO in front of the entire staff. The CFO, Clara, sent a fruit basket to my house, which arrived around noon with a card that simply said, "Worth every penny of the catering budget," and included a bottle of very expensive scotch tucked between the apples and oranges. Because Clara understood that some victories required celebration that went beyond fruit. I texted her a photo of the basket with a thank you message, and she responded with, "The break room has a betting pool on who the interim CEO will be. I'm currently the favorite at 3-1 odds. Should I be concerned?" I told her she should absolutely be concerned, but also flattered, and that I'd talk to her later in the week about potential next steps, which was my way of saying, "Yes, you're probably getting promoted, but let's pretend there's some suspense here." HR, specifically Patricia, the head of HR, who I was 90% sure never slept and instead survived purely on efficiency and the tears of policy violators, sent me a meme, an actual meme. It was that gif of someone walking away from an explosion without looking back, captioned, "Marcus Hale leaving the branch opening 2025 colorized." I didn't even know Patricia knew what memes were, let alone that she had a sense of humor hiding underneath the professional exterior. I responded with a laughing emoji and a note saying, "Please confirm this doesn't violate any HR policies before I share it with the board." And she sent back, "I'll allow it," with a winking emoji that somehow made the whole thing even funnier. But the real aftermath wasn't in the emails or the memes or the office gossip. It was at home in the weird tension that had settled over our house like fog over a harbor, making everything feel slightly off-kilter and uncertain. Tessa had apologized again Sunday morning over coffee and pancakes that I'd made as a peace offering because I've learned that carbs and maple syrup are excellent relationship maintenance tools. She'd woken up with clearer eyes and a calmer demeanor, the kind that comes after a good night's sleep and some emotional processing time. "I'm sorry. I said I was embarrassed of you," she said, pouring syrup with the precision of someone who was trying to focus on something other than difficult emotions. "That came out wrong. I wasn't embarrassed of you. I was embarrassed of the situation, of what people would think, of having my professional life and personal life collide in the most spectacular way possible." She looked up at me, fork hovering over her pancakes. "But I shouldn't have made you feel like you did something wrong by defending yourself. Gregory was being a complete ass. And honestly, someone needed to take him down several pegs. I just wish it hadn't been quite so public." I listened quietly, which was maybe the most mature thing I'd done all weekend because Tessa needed to talk through this and I needed to shut up and let her, which goes against every instinct I have, but is apparently what healthy communication looks like according to the relationship books. Liam keeps leaving on my desk like he's trying to tell me something. Some lessons I've learned over 8 years of marriage and countless smaller disasters. Need silence more than explanations. Need listening more than defending. Need space to breathe rather than immediate solutions. "I get it," I said after she'd finished, after she'd eaten 3 bites of pancake and pushed her plate around nervously waiting for my response. "I should have told you who I was, or at least given you a heads up before I showed up. It wasn't fair to surprise you like that. To put you in a position where you had to find out the same time everyone else did. I meant it too in retrospect, which is always 20/20 and conveniently arrives after you've already made all your mistakes. I could see how my little revenge plot had collateral damage that included my wife's professional reputation and peace of mind." She reached across the table and took my hand, syrup, sticky fingers and all. "Next time you decide to reveal you're secretly Batman or whatever," she said. And I could see the smile starting to break through despite her best efforts to stay serious. "Maybe give me a heads up, like a text that says, 'Hey honey, planning to destroy your boss tonight. Where's something nice? Deal?'" I said, squeezing her hand. Although technically I'm more like Bruce Wayne than Batman since I don't fight crime. I just occasionally humiliate people who deserve it while wearing expensive suits. She laughed at that real laughter that meant we were going to be okay. That this would eventually become one of those stories we told at dinner parties in 10 years. Embellished and exaggerated until it barely resembled what actually happened. The week progressed with a strange mixture of normalcy and chaos. Tessa went to work Monday and reported back that the office was split between people who thought I was a hero for standing up to Gregory. People who thought I was a dramatic attention seeker who could have handled it more professionally, and people who were just excited to have something interesting to talk about besides quarterly reports and the broken coffee machine on the third floor. Her colleagues treated her differently. Not worse necessarily, but different, like she'd suddenly become made of glass or important china that might break if handled incorrectly. Sarah from marketing asked if she should curtsy when she sees me now. Tessa reported over dinner Wednesday night. Her tone somewhere between amused and exasperated. And D. Rarick from sales wanted to know if I could put in a good word about his commission structure, like I have any influence over that. She stabbed at her salad with more force than necessary. Oh, and Jenny from accounting asked if we're hiring because apparently now everyone thinks I'm the secret gateway to employment. I made appropriately sympathetic noises while trying not to laugh because this was exactly what Tessa had been worried about. And I didn't want to seem like I was taking her concerns lightly, even though the image of someone curtsying to my wife in the break room was objectively hilarious. Give it time, I said, which is what you say when you don't have actual solutions, but want to sound wise and supportive. Once they get used to it, once there's new gossip to focus on, it'll settle down. You're still the same person doing the same excellent work. By Thursday, Clara had been officially named interim CEO, and her first act was sending a company-wide email about rebuilding trust and fostering genuine team culture, which was professional speak for the previous guy was a tool, and we're going to do better. She scheduled one-on-ones with every department head, including Tessa, and apparently spent the entire meeting asking about Tessa's ideas for improving operations without once mentioning me or the party or anything related to the drama, which Tessa appreciated more than any explicit reassurance could have provided. Friday afternoon, as I was wrapping up work for the week and contemplating whether I'd earned a beer or if it was still too early for alcohol, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers are usually either spam calls about my car's extended warranty or relatives I've been avoiding, but something made me pick up. Marcus Hale, I answered using my professional voice that I reserve for people who might be important. Mr. Hale, this is Bradley Chun from the Business Chronicle. A young-sounding voice said, and I could hear typing in the background like he was already writing the article while we spoke. I'm doing a piece on leadership styles in modern corporations. And I heard about an interesting incident at your company's recent branch opening. Would you be available for comment? I leaned back in my chair, considering whether talking to a reporter about the Gregory situation was a brilliant PR move or a terrible idea that would haunt me forever. Off the record, I asked because I've dealt with reporters before and I know how this game works. The incident you're referring to was a reminder that leadership is about respect, not hierarchy, about earning your position through competence, rather than assuming it through title. But on the record, you can quote me as saying, Hale Industries is committed to fostering a workplace culture based on mutual respect and genuine achievement. He tried to push for more details for the juicy gossip that would make his article go viral, but I deflected with the skill of someone who's sat through enough board meetings to know how to say nothing while sounding like you said something important. We ended the call with him slightly disappointed and me relieved that I'd managed to navigate that particular minefield without creating more problems. As I left for work, which is to say walked from my home office to the living room because the commute is terrible, but at least there's no traffic, I turned back and saw Tessa sitting on the couch, laptop open, probably reviewing something for Monday's meetings. Next time you invite me to your office events, I said, unable to resist one final callback to the whole mess, just remember I pay the caterer, she groaned. The kind of groan that's 50% annoyance and 50% affection. The sound of someone who's resigned to spending their life with a person who can't resist a good one-liner, even when silence would be the smarter choice. I'm never inviting you to another work event, she said. But she was smiling when she said it, which meant she was lying, which meant we were definitely okay. You're banned. Blacklisted. I'm putting your photo up at security with "Do not admit" written underneath. I winked at her because winking is my signature move when I've said something ridiculous and want to acknowledge it while also committing to the bit. Too late, sweetheart. I own security, too. I'm already on the list as that guy who can go anywhere because he literally owns the building. She threw a couch pillow at me, which I deserved, and I caught it because my reflexes are surprisingly good for someone who spends most of his day sitting at a desk making financial decisions. And in that moment, with my wife laughing despite herself and the week's chaos finally settling into something resembling normally, I realized something important. Revenge isn't always about rage, about getting even, about making someone pay for their mistakes in the most dramatic way possible. Sometimes revenge is quieter than that. Sometimes it's about showing up when you're not expected, about refusing to be diminished by someone else's arrogance, about standing in a room full of people who underestimated you and letting them realize slowly, painfully, unforgettably that they never knew who they were dealing with in the first place. It's about the moment of recognition in someone's eyes when they understand they've been playing checkers while you were playing chess. That their entire evening of condescension was being observed and catalogued by the one person who had the power to make it mean something. It's about smiling through the insults, letting them pile up like kindling, and then striking the match at exactly the right moment so everyone can watch the fire together. And yeah, maybe I could have handled it more professionally. Could have pulled Gregory aside privately and had a stern conversation about respect and workplace culture. Could have been the bigger person who took the high road and dealt with things through proper channels. But where's the fun in that? Where's the story? Where's the lesson for everyone watching who needed to see that arrogance has consequences? That being a jerk eventually catches up with you. That you can't treat people like they're beneath you just because you think you're standing on top of the mountain when really you're just standing on a hill and the actual mountain is behind you, watching, waiting, taking notes. Because revenge isn't always about rage or destruction or burning bridges just to watch them burn. Sometimes it's about showing up, smiling, being underestimated and misunderstood and dismissed as unimportant. And then at the perfect moment, with perfect timing, in front of the perfect audience, letting everyone realize you're the one who signs the paychecks, owns the building, and has been paying for their artisanal shrimp cocktails all along. And if that makes me petty, well, I'm a petty man with a company, a wife who's only mostly annoyed with me, and a laminated copy of Gregory's resignation letter that Liam framed and hung in the office as a motivational reminder. I can live with that.